SCP-9207. Object Class: Euclid. Special Containment Procedures: SCP-9207 is stored in a locked chamber at Site-41. Power cabling is removed between trials. Tests require an isolated generator, manual kill switch, and 2 auxiliary light sources on independent circuits. Access restricted to Level 3 personnel. Description: SCP-9207 is a portable dual-head construction floodlight. When powered, it reveals pale, insect-like entities clinging to walls, ceilings, and floors within its beam. These entities are invisible under normal illumination. They retreat from steady brightness but advance whenever output flickers or drops. Direct contact has not been observed. Acquisition: retrieved from a condemned building site after repeated worker fatalities. A take note on the device reads, "Keep the light even or they stack."
The file stops there. What I've got is a copied field recording made a week later inside County General, a condemned hospital on the edge of the district. The copy isn't clean. You can hear the lamp hum, the cord scraping tile, and the kind of breathing people do when they're trying not to panic. I'm going to tell you what the recording captured as clearly as I can. They took 5 inside. Hart led it. Vale walked point with the stand. Morris kept the generator alive. Sloan handled medical. Ortega wore the recorder on his vest. The plan was simple on paper. Roll SCP-9207 through the North Wing, keep output steady, document behavior, then backtrack along the same path. They started in the entry vestibule. Glass popped under boots. The stand squealed like it hadn't moved in years. When Morris brought the floodlight up, the tone climbed in a straight line, and the dark peeled off the wall. The first surface was alive. Pale, flattened shapes clung to the paint, many-limbed and glossy like wet shell. They didn't cross the brightest center. They stacked at the edge of the beam, crowded tight along the gradient. Sloan said it felt colder near them. You can hear it in his breath. Admissions was a shallow bowl of paperwork and broken chairs. The recording picked up a faint ticking under everything, soft at first, like claws on wood. When the beam slid across the room, the forms layered 3 and 4 deep. Every small shift made a wet sound. Hart called for a hold in a slow pan. Morris said the readout was clean. Vale kept the head split so one covered ceiling seams. It didn't help much. The ceiling had them too, panels flexing like something underneath was testing the grid. They moved past a bank of empty kiosks into Corridor Blue. The directional signs were half peeled, and where the arrows used to be, there were long, lighter stripes. When the lamp swept those stripes, the forms showed in full. Not scattered. Arranged. They clung in bands that matched the old paint, thickest where the beam fell off. They passed radiology. The doors were chained, but the seam between them boiled when the light touched it. They didn't cross the bright strip down the center. They packed the dull edges and held there, layered and reflective. Something rattled behind the paneling. Nobody opened it. The first real problem wasn't a creature, it was the stairs. Pulling a heavy stand-up concrete steps while babysitting a generator is a bad way to keep a smooth line. Halfway up, the cord snagged on a cracked riser. The light dipped for a breath. The reaction on the recording is human and immediate. A curse, a gasp, shoes slipping. In that fraction of a second, the shapes moved. It wasn't a swarm. It was bodies dragging all at once, limbs clicking across concrete, a sheet of motion that got closer and then stopped the instant the bulb stabilized. When the beam came back, the forms were a step nearer and very still. They regrouped on the landing and forced themselves to slow down. Second floor. Telemetry made them all go quiet. The room was rails and brackets and bare plaster where monitors used to hang. The walls had long strips like careful peels. When the lamp swept those strips, the forms lined up in columns shoulder to shoulder. If they had faces, you couldn't pick one. The only sign of attention was the way the nearest ones angled toward the edge of the light and held there, patient and flat. Morris forced more current through the heads to buy time. You can hear the filament start to sing. Hart told them to keep the beam off the floor and never swing it across one another. For a minute, it worked. The thing stayed at the periphery, waiting at the line like an audience against a rope. Then the first long flicker came. It wasn't a blink. The lamp dropped to half, wobbled, then fought back. The room changed shape in that dip. Limbs slapped tile. Something small fell inside the closed elevator shaft down the hall and echoed like a tin drum. When the beam leveled, the forms were 3 feet from the stand. Vale's voice dropped low. He said they were closer. Hart counted distances out loud and called for slow retreat. They backed into the hall with the lamp angled like a shield. The sound on the recording shifted from room noise to travel noise. Wheels thumped cracks. Boots slid. The generator's tone climbed higher as Morris overdrove the choke. He admitted it wasn't smart. He did it anyway because it worked for a while. Each surge bought seconds, and seconds were enough to clear a door before the next dip. By the time they reached the ICU doors, the dips had turned greedy. It started as a microdrop you only noticed because the things answered it with motion. Then another. Each little wobble was a chance they took. An inch at a time. An inch became a yard. Sloan kept saying, "Keep it even, like he was talking to a patient who wouldn't hold still. Hart stuck to protocol and kept the team in shape with simple instructions. No sudden movements, no turning your back. Keep the head steady. Don't talk unless you have to. ICU gave them a lesson and a trap. The glass panes were clouded with residue. When the beam hit, the forms clung to the milky film instead of the clear parts. They pressed so tight the film dimpled and cracked. Vale tried to skirt the threshold and clip the stand on the door frame. The head bounced. The beam trembled. The room answered by lifting, a whole section of wall skinning itself into motion and settling again at the edge of the brightness. Sloan made a sound like he was going to be sick. Nobody said anything about it. They tried an idea in the next hallway. A controlled dim. Hart wanted to see if a predictable pattern would keep the forms from gaining ground. Morris warned him it was a bad place to get smart. Hart pushed for a short test anyway. One head down to 90% for 2 seconds back to full. Vale called the count. They did it once. The result was clear. The forms took the 2 seconds and made them theirs. They advanced a clean half step and froze at the new line when full power returned. Hart said no more tests. Morris said good. Sloan said nothing. They reached the elevator bank again from the other side. The seam where the doors met was packed tight with bodies, all pressed into the crack like a drain. The lamp's center line cut a silver strip down the seam that nothing crossed, but the edges boiled. Something tapped in the shaft. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap. It matched the tiny oscillation Morris couldn't eliminate. I don't think that's a coincidence. Service corridors are built for carts and compressed air, not for people pulling a temperamental son on wheels. The narrow walls made the beam crowd itself into a tunnel, and the forms lined that tunnel shoulder to shoulder. A pale audience that waited for mistakes. The generator room was close. You can hear hope in their steps again. Morris started listing steps under his breath. Stabilize. Check harmonics. Drop the choke. Spin up aux. He didn't get there. The lamp caught in a micro stutter, and the corridor answered with a shiver, a wave of pale climbing the far wall, spilling onto the floor, and skating toward them with a dry leaf scrape. It stopped when the beam hardened, then leaned into the line, as if it could feel where the floor got warm. Vale's radio slipped off his shoulder and hit tile. The plastic cracks snapped the air. The walls answered with another shiver, hundreds of limbs repositioning at once. Hart told everyone to stop making noise. That order landed like a joke they all understood. They cleared the corner and saw the generator door. It was propped open with a bucket. Inside, the facility unit was dead and half-stripped. Morris swore once and wheeled the portable as close as he dared. He wanted to tie the second head to a separate portable battery pack as a last-ditch buffer. Against orders, he tried it anyway. It didn't help. Auxiliary light that wasn't 9207 didn't reveal anything and didn't change behavior. They still moved on the dips in the 9207 beam. The battery pack bought them nothing except time wasted, and in there, time was what the walls ate. The next dip wasn't a single event. It was a string of tiny drops like a bad cough. The tape filled with motion, limbs on tile, a ragged drag, soft knocks from inside the walls like studs settling. Vale kept the stand pointed down the long axis and backed them out of the doorway so nobody got pinned. Sloane kept repeating, keep it even, as if his voice could sketch a straight line. Hart stayed on distances and breaths. Morris forced one more surge and made the filaments sing in pain. Something important happened at pharmacy that I haven't heard most people talk about when they speculate on this file. The forms didn't just advance and freeze anymore, they learned the beat. On the recording, you can hear them begin to move during the rise back to full, not just at the low point. They pushed into the brightness for a fraction of a second, then flattened away before the center could burn them, like timing a wave. It wasn't chaotic, it was measured. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Their bodies made that rhythm audible on plaster. Past pharmacy. The floor changed from tile to old rubber. The stand stopped squealing and started thudding. The generator tone drifted. Morris told them not to speak. The lamp steadied for a handful of long breaths. It was the last clean run they got. They hit Children's. The murals were torn and gray. When the beam crossed a cartoon sun, the paint blushed white and the forms underneath showed through it, arranged along the rays. Vale cursed through his teeth and kept moving. A little plastic chair skated across the floor without touching anyone's boot. The tape caught the legs ticking as it went. Then the beam found it and the movement stopped. Somewhere between Children's and the old cafeteria, the lamp's left head started to lag behind the right by a hair. You can hear it as a phase between hums, a soft beat that shouldn't be there. The forms read that beat and began to stair-step through the room. Left head down a fraction, left wall moves, right head catches up, right wall holds. The team had been fighting obvious flicker. Now they were dealing with a slow mismatch that made motion constant. They tried one last controlled choice. Morris killed the left head and pushed every scrap of clean power into the right, then swung that single hot cone wide to clear a path. It worked for a few seconds. The right side beam was cruelly bright and the forms shrank from it. The left side went dark, and the wall there made a sound like cloth slumping, and then 1,000 small feet finding purchase. Hart ordered a pivot and a retreat. They gave up on the generator room and aimed for the nearest stairs. Back in the stairwell, the cord dragged like an anchor. The first 4 steps went clean, the 5th didn't. The stand hit a crack and bounced. The beam trembled. The stairwell answered with a rush. It wasn't a roar, it was the scuff of bodies on concrete layered, until it became one wide sound. Vale planted a boot and stopped the stand from rolling back over Sloane's foot. The light steadied. The sound stopped inches from the line. On the landing, they took turns breathing slow. Morris told Hart the head was going to fail from heat if he kept squeezing it. Hart told him to keep squeezing it. They tried to move again. The tape picked up something like frost crackle on the metal handrail. I don't know what that really was. I only know it only happens when the forms are pressed shoulder to shoulder and a little colder air leaks through them. They didn't make it to the next flight. The head finally stuttered in a way brute force couldn't hide. The beam coughed 3 times. The room answered 3 times, faster each time, as if a drummer had finally learned a riff. When the light tried to climb back to full, the forms leaned into the climb and closed to body length. Vale said they were close enough to touch. Hart said don't test that. They pivoted into a side hall they hadn't planned to use. It smelled like disinfectant and wet cardboard. Records from the signs that were left. The shelves were bare. The forms lined both sides, and the ceiling. A pale tunnel with a warm strip down the middle where the beam laid. If you've never felt a room look at you, I hope you never do. I think they felt that. The last attempt at control was ugly. Morris dumped the choke, dragged the generator toward open floor, and went to spin it for a hard restart to clear whatever harmonic mess he'd built up. He yelled for 3 breaths. On his 3rd count he pulled. The beam dropped to near black for half a second, while the unit caught. That was the second the forms had been waiting for since the stairwell. The recording breaks in a way that tells a story by itself. The mic skews and catches breath over speech. Hart is clear for one line. Back. Then he's gone in the scrape of boots and the squeal of wheels. Sloane shouts, "Run." Vale grunts with the effort of pulling the stand through something that isn't air. Morris says auxiliary and then doesn't get the words out. The right head flares so bright you can hear it in the tone, and then something inside the housing pops like a brittle seed. When the lamp fails, it isn't a fade. It's a hand over a mouth. The hospital's silence comes back all at once. On the recording, the last sounds are movement in air, a lot of small feet, and Ortega saying into the dark that they're closer now. There's a human noise after that I can't place to a name. Then the copy I have turns to hiss and stays there. The file calls it incomplete and asks for clearer controls. There's no signed report from Hart or Vale or anyone else in the accessible stack. The device sits in a locker with fresh bulbs and a clean tag. The note from the construction site lives in the scan. Keep the light even, or they stack. I went through that copy more times than I should have. Listening close, you can hear the pattern plain. They don't charge. They don't act like hunters. They treat light like a tool that's yours until you slip. Every wobble is a rung. Every stutter is another rung. They climb on your mistakes. In pharmacy, they learn to move during the rise. In the corridors, they learned the lamps phase. By records, they had the beat of 5 people and a bad generator memorized. That's all the story I've got. And all I need. A hospital that still holds its sounds. A floodlight that makes walls honest. A rule that wasn't kept long enough. If you ever find SCP-9207 sitting against a wall in a place like that, don't touch the choke. Don't drop anything. And don't let it flicker.